Shalom. Is anybody there? Hello. Shalom, shalom. Erev Tov. Shalom. We'll give everybody a few minutes to log in. Excellent. Thanks, Joe. Shalom, shalom. Shalom, Leslie. We are on day 19 of counting the Omer. Almost 3 weeks through it. Okay, I'm going to give it just another minute, and then we're going to get started. Shalom, Jim. Shalom, shalom. Okay. Hope everybody's doing well. I'm going to wait for my wife, who slipped out again. Hopefully she can get back in here momentarily. Well, let's go ahead. Baruch atah Yahweh Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Yahweh noten haTorah. B'shem Yeshua Mashiach. Amen. Okay, shalom everybody. We are in week 5 of our Techilat Hadavar, which is the first principles, the basic principles, the basics of the Word of God, the Word of Mashiach, Davar HaMashiach. Our topic last week was Smichat Hayad, which is the laying on of hands, and this week it's going to be TekumahMiBeinHaMetim. So once again, I'm going to go to our portion, our sort of root scripture, and read from there to kind of just get the juices flowing. and get back into the scheme of things. Should have had it open already. I don't have it open yet. Okay, so we are going to Ivrim, and that's Hebrews, chapter 6. Therefore, let us leave the basics of Davar HaMashiach. That's Techilat HaDavar. Techilat Davar HaMashiach. And let us go on to perfection. Or do you again lay foundations other than these? Teshuvah from works of death. Emunah in Elohim, the doctrines of Tevilah, which is immersions. Smechat Hayad, the laying on of hand. And TekumahMiBeinHaMetim, which is what we're looking at tonight, which is the resurrection of the dead. And Mishpat Olam will be our last one. We will cover that next week. So, TekumahMiBeinHaMetim, literally, I'm going to paste that into our text field here. If I can figure this out. Literally, that phrase that you're looking at right there, if you're looking at the text field down there, is arising from among the dead ones. That's just a very kind of literal way to look at that phrase in Hebrew. So, and the point that I'm making in saying it that way is we believe in a literal resurrection. And we're going to get into that quite in depth tonight. I expect to take the whole time tonight. Of course, you know how that goes. I could be surprised. But we take it very literally that Yeshua rose from the dead. And the reason I have to say that once again is because there are a lot of people in the world teaching that Yeshua didn't actually physically rise from the dead as a human being, that what you saw was a ghost, an apparition, and I'm speaking particularly of the time after what the text says he rose from the dead. There are people that claim that that what they saw was actually just an apparition or a ghost or a spirit. That doesn't match what the Word of God says. Once again, we're Peshitta people, which means we believe the plain meaning of the text, and I think the text is very easy on this subject, especially in regard to what Yeshua did and their testimony about him. So why then is this thing, TekumahMiBeinHaMetim, which most people are very dismissive over? We know how very hard it is to bring a body back from the dead. Obviously, if you catch a person in cardiac arrest, and even after they have died, if you catch them soon enough, then you can bring them back. But you'll see that that is not what this was. They weren't sitting there beating on Yeshua's chest. But this is and the point of that is this is very much a miracle. And to me, it is the miracle of miracles. And it is the mark of Messiah. It identifies him. The resurrection from the dead is probably it is the absolute most critical piece of what we call the Besorah, the good news, the message of Messiah. The fact that he rose from the dead, everything else about him, his character, his mercy, his compassion, everything about him rests on the fact that he is risen from the dead. So this is very, very critical to us who profess, and especially for those of us who are part of Mikdash Me'at or some congregation. You want to make sure that the people that you associate with actually believe in the physical death, burial, and resurrection of Yeshua, that all his blood was shed on the earth, that his body was physically done, and that 3 days later he rose from the dead. So this is very, very critical information, and so it behooves us to understand not only that fact that it's a scientific miracle, if you will, that he rose from the dead, it behooves us to understand also what the wider concept of resurrection of the dead is in the Bible and how it applies to us. So that's what we're going to look at tonight. Shalom, John. So we are going to start in Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, Corinthians Aleph, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And for those of us in our congregation, we read this passage now every week, along with other scriptures about Yeshua. We read this passage every week, and I think it's critical that we do so, and it's critical that we teach ourselves to understand that the power of the Bessel Ra is rooted in the fact that Yeshua is risen from the dead. And I think that's why we had a question last week about why there's no miracles, why we don't see, because we were talking about Smichat Hayad. Why do we not see the power of the Ruach HaKodesh like they did in the first century? Well, probably one, and I speculated about some reasons why I believe that's true, but one of the reasons I believe is because we don't really, I think when you pin a lot of people down, they don't believe that Yeshua rose from the dead. They have some sort of wishy-washy idea about it, or like I said, they have another theory about what actually happened, if they're even interpreting the scriptures honestly at all. So in Corinthians Aleph, chapter 15, verse 12, now, if it is declared that Mashiach rose from the dead, how can some say among you that there is no resurrection of the dead? So already 2,000 years ago, among believers, there were people who were professing that there is no resurrection of the dead. Now, mind you, if you go and talk to the Jewish community today, you find out that most of them, especially in the Reformed Jewish community, they don't believe in the resurrection of the dead. Now, some of the Orthodox still do, but even some of them are kind of ambivalent about it. So, so even 2,000 years ago, in the believing community, Shaul says, why do some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? If we've been going around declaring that Yeshua is risen from the dead, why are you going around and saying there's no such thing as a resurrection? And so this is the very hub of our faith, the crux of our faith. It's the centerpiece of it, and without it, we are ridiculous. And he goes on and says, and if there is no resurrection of the dead, then Mashiach also has not risen. And if Mashiach is not risen, then is our proclamation in vain, and your absolute trust is also in vain. And we are also found false witnesses of Elohim, because we have testified of Elohim that he raised up Mashiach when he had not raised him. So it makes Shaul and Kepha and Yochanan and all the Shlichim, all of the apostles, it makes all of them liars, is what Paul is saying, if there is no resurrection of the dead, because they've been going around saying that Yeshua, the man, is risen from the dead. So this is telling you that resurrection of the dead is, like I said, it's the centerpiece of our trust in Messiah. It's the centerpiece of everything that we believe. Without it, the scriptures become just another book, in my opinion. A good book, a historically accurate book, but just another book like any other book. You might as well, why put all your trust in it? The thing that I want to mention tonight, and we'll probably touch on it a few times, is that in order to believe this fact that Yeshua rose from the dead, it's not about scientific proof. It's not about seeing the body. It's not about seeing the ark. It's not about seeing the shroud of Turin. It's not about having some sort of earthly evidence. It's about the declaration of the word of God. Either you believe it or you don't. And if you believe it, that means that God has revealed to you that it's true. Now, why did he do that? Only he knows why he reveals to certain people what he reveals to them. Only he knows the heart. Only he knows who he wants in his kingdom and why, other than the fact that we turn and pour ourselves out on him in repentance. We can't explain why he does what he does. But this fact is, in my history with getting a Bible degree and getting a master's degree with a lot of courses in religion, and I ran across people from all denominations in all of my studies, and I quickly saw that there are many people who read the scriptures all the time and seem to be religious people and seem to have a sort of a good I want to say understanding, but that's, in this context, it's almost the wrong word. They seem to have some acumen about the scriptures. They seem to, they're not ignorant, is the point that I'm trying to make. And yet, they don't really understand the Messiah is physically risen from the dead. They think that he is something other than a human being. So it's critical that we understand that Yeshua was a human being who rose from the dead. There's many versions of him, and that's not our topic tonight. So don't start a chain of discussion about it tonight. So previously to that, those few verses that we read in 1 Corinthians 15, Shaul said, "For I delivered to you first of all that which I had also received, that Mashiach died for our sins according to the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Kepha, and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brethren at once, of whom a great many are still living, though some are dead." And then Shaul goes on and says, and last of all, he appeared to me. So this is speaking about the actual physical body of Yeshua manifesting, showing up in the room and manifesting himself, showing himself, even touching people to prove that he, the human being that they had all known, was risen from the dead. So any questions so far? Try to keep it germane to the topic, but I'll give you a second to ask any questions.
I'm not making noise.
Okay. So go to Ma'aseh HaShlichim, Acts chapter 2. In Acts chapter 2, verse 22, and I want to set the stage a little bit. Kepha, Peter, is declaring the Besserah in the verse that we pick up in. And of course, what happens is, let's see, we start day 20 tonight. So we are basically 30 days away from the anniversary of this happening. They had counted up the Omer for 50 days while Yeshua was appearing to them over and over in his resurrected body, serving them dinner, eating breakfast with them, having them touch his body to prove that he was alive, being a human being, just being one that has been glorified. Okay, and so that has gone on, and the week before this happens, Yeshua tells them that he's going to send them koach, power from on high, and that they needed to wait in Jerusalem. So this chapter begins with that morning. Those 500 people that Shaul just mentioned that knew that Yeshua had risen from the dead, they're assembled in a room, and the koach, the power, fell on them, and they started speaking in all the known languages of the world. And people from all over the world, Jews from all over the world, including people who had converted to Judaism, not just Jewish genetic people, but converts, godly people who were also worshipers of Elohim in the temple, were there, and they heard the Besserah, they heard the good news, they heard the praises of Elohim declared in their own languages by Galilean, the men who were from Galil, who should not know all of their languages, and they knew this, and so that prompted Kepha, who was filled with the Ruach, to stand up and start declaring the Besserah for the first time ever after Yeshua did it for 3.5 years. Okay, and he says, "Men of Israel," verse 22, "hear these words, Yeshua HaNatzri, a man of Elohim, who appeared among you by miracles and signs and wonders, which Elohim did by him among you. As you yourselves know, this man, who was consecrated for this purpose by the foreknowledge and will of Elohim, you have delivered into the hands of wicked men, and you have executed and murdered him, whom Elohim has raised up." And there's the same wording, TekumahMiBeinHaMetim, resurrection from the dead. That word there for raised up is I'm willing to, I haven't looked at it in the Hebrew, but I'm willing to bet it's a form of the word kum, which means to arise, to raise up. Elohim has raised up having destroyed the pains of Mavet, which is death, and that's a whole lot more than just physical death, but certainly physical death itself, because it was not possible for Sheol to hold him. And so there's Mavet and Sheol linked there. People in Mikdash Ma'at will understand what that's about, because we've been talking about that quite a bit lately. And so so Kepha has declared to the Jewish people, I want to set the tone here, make sure you understand what's going on here. These are Jewish people who believe in God, and he has told them, you know who this is. In other words, you people have watched for 3.5 years. Every time there was a feast here and you came in for a feast, Yeshua was in the temple. You heard of it. You were here at Passover just 50 days before. And so you knew that he was executed at that time. And what we are telling you is that God has raised him, that same Yeshua, from Nazareth. He has raised him from the dead. Okay? So, and then he begins to quote one of the Tehillim. And I'm in verse 25 now. For David said concerning him, I saw Yahweh always before me, for he is on my right hand, so that I should not be shaken. Therefore my heart is comforted and my glory is exalted. Even my body shall rest in hope, because you will not leave my soul in Sheol, neither will you suffer your Hasid to see decay. And a Hasid is someone who is devout. You will not suffer your Hasid, your devout one, to see decay. You have revealed to me the way of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence. And so what David is doing is taking a psalm that was, or I'm sorry, Kepha. What Kepha is doing is taking a Tehillah, a song that was written by David, where David is lamenting probably one of the attacks from Shaul, the king, and the threat of death that was upon him a lot in his life. He's lamenting that, and he's putting his hope in Elohim, and the Ruach gives him inspiration to write these very words, and they are messianic words. They are about Messiah. And so Kepha goes on and explains that that this is talking about, I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but he goes on and explains that the Tehillah is not only talking about David. In other words, there was a practical application for it for him. Certainly David believed that he would rise from the dead. But Kepha goes on and explains that this is actually talking about Yeshua. But this is double impact here. I want to take a deeper look at this. He says, and this is the psalmist that I'm talking about who's being quoted here. He says, you will not allow my soul to be left in Sheol. And Sheol is not the grave, even though it gets translated that way. Sheol is the place of the dead. And it doesn't matter whether that person is righteous or wicked. All of the dead, and anyone who is a human being who dies, whether he's righteous or wicked, goes to Sheol in some capacity. Now, there's obviously they're there waiting on judgment. But he also says his Hasid will not see decay. All right, and that's talking about his human body, your devout one, will not see decay. So he's basically saying that Yeshua, his soul would go into Sheol, and his body would be subject to decay. But what the psalmist is saying is, this body is not going to see decay. And if you know anything about the science of death, and I learned this years ago, and I think it's accurate, rigor mortis doesn't really set in until after 3 days. In other words, the body is touchable and preparable for 3 days. That's why the women went back to the grave. After that, it starts blowing up. I remember I learned about it when I was about 10 or 12 years old, and my neighbor had this big old yellow dog, looked a lot like Old Yeller, die under her porch, and we had to go under there and get him. And he had been there for more than 3 days, and he was swollen. Rigor mortis had set in, and his body started to swell, and you know the rest of it. I don't want to get all ugly about it. So it's two different things here. So, and he goes on in verse 31 and says that and basically proves it. So David foresaw and spoke concerning the resurrection of Mashiach. Now, there are theologians in the world who say it's too hard to get that interpretation out of Psalm 2. Well, okay, that's on you, but the book of Acts tells me plainly that that's what David is saying. And of course, the Ruach HaKodesh has to reveal the resurrection to you anyway. So there are going to be people who did not believe it. But what I'm telling you is that the scriptures make it easily discernible from the scriptures themselves what David is saying. He spoke and foresaw concerning the resurrection of Mashiach, that his soul, and he's going on and further explaining, just like I try to do, that verse in Tehillah 16, his soul was not left in Sheol, neither did his body see decay. So this is proving that Yeshua's resurrection was certainly about his body, because in order for it not to see decay, it had to get up out of the grave before a certain time. Is Abraham's bosom a reference to Sheol? In a sense, it is. That is certainly where. So what I said, and I anticipated a question like this. I should have just went ahead and addressed it. But so what Stephen is asking is, Yeshua teaches us that the righteous man died and went to Abraham's bosom, and the wicked man died and went to Gehenna. And he said there was a great chasm fixed between the two places, and that you can't cross over from one to the other. But in my mind, yes, the whole place, if you will, the whole area, the whole space, that space of the universe would be called Sheol. So this is not technically hell yet, if you ask me, even though certain people, certainly on that other side of the great gulf fixed between, seems like they're headed for hell. So
what about the rich man?
That's what I'm talking about. What'd you ask?
What about the rich man?
That's what I was talking about. And then Kepha goes on and says, this very Yeshua Elohim has raised up, and we are all his witnesses. And so that's what I was talking about a while ago. The only thing we have to stand on is not the Shroud of Turin. Other than all of the historical supporting evidence, because there is a lot of it outside of the Bible. There are many people that testified of the veracity of the claims of the apostles outside of the Bible itself. But other than, we don't need the Shroud of Turin. We've never, you and I, because we're 2,000 years removed from this event, we've never seen this. I can't prove that he rose from the dead. The only proof I have is the Word of God and what he's done for me since I professed faith in that. But these guys were eyewitnesses to this. This very Yeshua Elohim has raised up, and we are all his witnesses. You're talking about those 500 that were there speaking in those other languages. They were eyewitnesses to the fact that Yeshua got up out of a grave. And you have to remember that before he went in the grave, his body was torn, shredded to pieces. All of his blood was probably just about gone, except for the residue of what was just all over the outside of his body. But his body was torn open. His blood was shed. He was beaten and bruised and hung on a tree. And so the guy was dead, and Kepha is saying, you've got 500 people standing here telling you that this man that was killed by our people and by Rome is risen from the dead. So they had compelling reasons to believe Kepha, because you can't just divorce this from the context. These guys were there for Shavuot. They were celebrating one of the feasts, which is about the raising of the 2 full loaves, and they had anticipated it for 50 days. They're in a very festive mood, and they see 500 people speaking all these different languages and declaring, who knows what they said. I'm willing to bet some of it was scripture, if not all of it, but declaring the praises of Elohim, the glories of Elohim, perhaps saying that Yeshua has risen from the dead, and they heard it, they understood it. This was a very powerful event. And Kepha is resting on the fact that they had seen this and that they had knowledge of 50 days before of Yeshua having been executed. And he's telling them he's risen from the dead. Okay? So, and that, by the way, is one of the criteria that is necessary in order to be declared a shaliach, a sent one, an apostle. You got people today, you got whole denominations called apostolic. You got people today that go around stealing churches because they think they're apostles. Nobody today is an apostle because nobody has seen the resurrection of Messiah. They haven't seen the resurrected body. It's all by trust. And what do we trust in? We trust in the declaration of the word of God that was done 2,000 years ago. Seems like we're getting ripped off. I don't think so. Yeshua said, blessed are those who have not seen and yet they believe. And that's what I was talking about, is this has to be revealed to you by God. But it's bizarre to me how in the family of faith you can have people who believe this, and they can be among people who do not believe it, and they won't do anything about it. They won't question them. They won't debate with them. They don't know how to defend their faith. And like I said, this is kind of the whole purpose of this study, is to make sure that we all understand the very basics. This is critical, basic information about trust in Messiah. So any questions before I move on? Stephen, did I clear up your question? Are there any other questions? Bueller? Okay. Okay, so we've talked about the fact that these guys were eyewitnesses. Let's prove that. We have 4 accounts of their having seen Yeshua risen from the dead. 4 accounts in the sense of 4 people wrote it down for us, 4 different people. And so the first one I'm going to go to is Matthew. Stephen says Facebook froze. I hope no one else's did. Mine looks like I've still got good feed. Let me check on it. Okay. Let me know if things are good. Give me a thumbs up or something. So in Matthew chapter 28, what has happened is Yeshua has been executed. He's been, Joseph of Arimathea went and bartered for his body and put him in a grave, and he's been in the grave since Wednesday night. And it is now Shabbat. And I want to clarify this. I need to do this briefly because it's not really our topic, but it's certainly applicable to our topic. Matthew chapter 28, thanks, Joe, is very specific about when the resurrection happened. In the evening of the Shabbat, when the first of the week began, and everybody on this video probably knows, because most of the names that I've seen are people that I'm familiar with, probably knows that the first of the week is Saturday night. So there came Miriam of Magdala and the other Miriam to see the tomb. And behold, a great earthquake took place, for a malach of Yahweh came down from heaven and went up and rolled away the stone from the door and sat on it. His appearance, and that's the malach, the messenger, his appearance was like lightning and his garments white as snow. And for fear of him, the guards who were watching trembled and became as if they were dead. It's as if they passed out. But the malach answered and said to the women, "You need not be afraid, for I know that you are seeking Yeshua who was executed. He is not here, for he has risen, just as he had said. Come in and see the place where he was laid, and go quickly and tell his Talmidim that he has risen from the dead." So there's your first mention of the fact that Yeshua, what happened to him when he was found not to be in the tomb. messengers of God showed up from heaven and told these ladies he was risen from the dead. Very similar episode is in Luke chapter 24. Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here. These are the same messengers. He has risen. Remember what he spoke to you while he was in the Galil, saying that Ben Ha'adam had to be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be executed and rise again on the third day. So this is making it very plain. This is 3 days past since he was executed, but now he is risen from the dead. Then over in Yochanan 20, when it was evening of the first day of the week, and this is after what we just read about. So the whole day has passed, and it's becoming evening. It's about to head into the second day of the week, and the doors were shut where the Talmudim were staying for fear of the Yodim. And you can establish that by putting this back in the context of John chapter 20. You'll see that it's time has passed since the ladies visited the tomb, and Kepha and John visited the tomb. The doors were shut. The Talmudim were staying where the Talmudim were staying for fear of the Yodim. But Yeshua came, stood among them, and said to them, Shalom Aleichem. He said this, and then he showed them his hands and his side. There's your physical proof with 10 witnesses, again, because Thomas is not there. You have 10 witnesses plus whoever of the extras were probably in the room with them, looking at his hands and his side. Okay, so it says the Talmudim rejoiced when they saw Adonenu, our master, and then Yeshua said to them, Shalom Aleichem, just as Avi has sent me, so I send you. And when he had said these things, he breathed on them and said to them, receive the Ruach HaKodesh. And that was the point. I'm going to get to your question here in a second, Joe. That was one of the reasons that I wanted to read this testimony is because once they had processed it, they saw his body, they probably touched him, they rejoiced, they were like, oh, wow. Then he says to them, he breathed on them and said to them, receive the Ruach HaKodesh. And so we talked about that last weekend, talking about Smichat Hayad, which hopefully you picked up on the fact that kind of almost goes hand in hand with Tevilah, with immersion, that those two kind of go together. Well, the one we're talking about tonight, TekumahMiBeinHaMetim, kind of goes hand in hand with the next one, which is Mishpat HaOlam, eternal judgment. So he says they've processed it, they've looked at his resurrected body, and then he breathes on them and they receive the Ruach HaKodesh. There are people going around saying that they have the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. They're saying that they have it. And there are people that I have known throughout my life as a believer, and all the many people that I've run into, hundreds, if not thousands of people that I've run into over the last 30 years. And many of them profess to have the Spirit, profess to believe, and they can't say of a certainty that Yeshua is risen from the dead. They do not have his Spirit if they cannot say that he is a physical human being, dead and risen again from the dead. So I just want us to maybe make a note of that, make a note of how critical it is, because, I'm not the one who said it. It was written down 2,000 years ago by guys that hopefully everybody here respects. Test the spirits and see whether or not they're from Elohim. And so there are many people out there going around saying they have the Spirit, but they don't, you never hear them say it with any certainty that Yeshua is a human being risen from the dead. All right, so we had a question I'm going to try to get to the answer of. So the question is, I've heard that Luca was not an actual eyewitness, but was writing the account for someone. Many discount his account. Any thoughts? I've heard that too. Hey, Shalom, Tracy. I've heard that too, and it is a lie, just like it's a lie that Luca was not Jewish. He is hanging out very early on with the apostles, who are all exclusively in the Jewish community. And if you've studied with us for any length of time, then you should know, like we call Yochanan Marcos, we call the book of Mark Yochanan Marcos because he had two names, just like Shaul. Shaul had two names. Before he met Yeshua, he had two names. Why? Because he was a Jewish person who grew up in Tarsus, which was a Gentile city, so his parents gave him a Gentile name so he wouldn't stick out. So he could be a part, he could play with the other kids, that kind of thing. Same thing with Luca. We just don't know. He didn't make it a point to give us his Jewish name. It wasn't a big deal. He was probably in a Greek city when he was writing it. We don't know. But nonetheless, I believe the scriptures over everybody's rumors. And so, yes, I've heard that rumor and I don't believe it. And the biggest reason why is Luke chapter 1. Since many have desired to have in writing the story of those works with which we are familiar, according to what was handed down to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of that very word. This means that Luca may not have been there the whole entire time. In other words, he wasn't there when Yochanan and Kepha at the very beginning of Yeshua's ministry were told to drop their nets and follow him. Okay, so he wasn't there, but he was there. He proves it. And since these things were seen by me also, because I was near and considered them all very carefully, that's why he's writing this book. He says, I will therefore write to you everything in order, most honorable Theophilus, so that you may know the truth of the words by which you were taught. So he's writing to Theophilus, which is probably a Greek person, whose name means the love of God. This guy is obviously a believer because he's been taught the words of truth already. And they want an account of these things from Luke, it seems. And so he says, yeah, I was there. I saw it all. I'll write it down for you. So he writes it down. And he says similar words. I don't think he gets as emphatic about it in Acts, because Luke also wrote the book of Acts. But let's just take a look at how he introduces that letter. The first book which I have written, O Theophilus, this is Acts chapter 1, concerning all the things which Adonai Yeshua HaMashiach began to do and teach until the day when he ascended, after he, through the Ruach HaKodesh, had given mitzvot to the shlichim who he had chosen, the very ones to whom he had also shown himself alive after he had suffered, with many wonders during the 40 days while appearing to them and talking with them concerning Malchuta Elohim. As he ate bread with them, he commanded them not to depart, but to wait for the promise of Ha'av, saying, you shall be immersed, blah, blah, blah. So this might be why people think that he wasn't a witness, because of the vagary of this paragraph. But go back and read Luke chapter 1. Okay, so hopefully we have that question answered. All right. So back to Yochanan is where we were. He breathed on them and said to receive the Ruach HaKodesh. This is after the fact, after he's been risen from the dead, and they've seen the scars in his hands and in his side. So he's proven to them that he is a human being who is in a resurrected body. He says, touch me and see that I am flesh and bone just as you have. Okay. So Kepha had quoted chapter 16 of Tehillah 16. Kepha had quoted that over in the book of Acts. And there are other allusions to or mentions of the resurrection in the Nevi'im, because that's what they declared. They taught the Besorah primarily from the Psalms when they taught it. And what I'm talking about is in Acts chapter 2 and over again in Acts chapter 3, I believe, and 4. And again in 13 and 14 especially, and then of course the letters that Shaul wrote. Many times when they're talking about the resurrection, they're referencing the Psalms. And so we've already looked at that. But there are other places, because again, you have to go back to our anchor verse. There are other places in the scriptures that talk about the resurrection, and this is what Shaul is saying is that this is a basic elementary principle of the word of Messiah, that we believe in the resurrection of the dead. So what are other places that talk about it? So there are scriptures that allude to it, Allude. They hint about it, about the resurrection. And then there are scriptures that are very, very direct and literal, and you can't wiggle out of them unless you do like our Jewish people and even some Gentile people do, and change your translation of the scripture such that it monkeys with the text so that you don't see the resurrection because you don't believe it, you don't want to believe it, so you change the translation so nobody else believes it. So we do have that going on, and you're going to see a big example where I fell victim to that in doing the translation that I did, which I've since rectified. So the first place that I'm going to bring up, even though it's not in my notes, that talks about the resurrection is going to be in Genesis.
And they're all going, what?
I've checked with a few people, Nancy, and it seems like our technology is good. It might be something on your end. I don't know, but hopefully you can keep watching. If not, you can go back hopefully, and I'll upload it to YouTube. Maybe it'll be better there because I'm getting good feed. Okay, so where was I going? I was going to Genesis to show you the resurrection. And I'm going to paste it because of the impact of it. I want to paste it, and it's kind of a visual. You kind of have to see this in the Hebrew. So I'm going to paste it in the notes section there, in the message section. Just give me 1 second. Some of you know this, but I wonder if you thought about it as a picture of the resurrection. It's kind of one of the anchor verses when I teach prophecy.
Like a sode.
It is a sode. And that aleph, that's the verse number. So I don't know if you're seeing me highlight that, but that first aleph there. So this is Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So this is Genesis 1:1, and it's basically in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And so I don't know if you can see me highlighted. I kind of doubt it, but hopefully you can see the et. So if you count 1, 2, 3, 4 words in, there's an aleph and a tav, and then you go 2 more words, and there's an aleph and a tav with a vav on it, a connector. And a vav is the number 6, and that's the 6th day in the world week. So we could get off into prophecy here. I don't want to do that. But what I wanted you to see is there is a picture here of the resurrected Messiah, because on the 4th day, Yeshua died, but on the 6th day, he's coming back. So in order for him to come back, he has to be alive, and he's been alive for 2,000 years. He's been alive through the Messianic age. So that is technically, but this is something that is very, very much deeper, and it's not something you can, you want to know about the resurrection? I can prove it to you, and you go and show them the Hebrew version of Genesis 1:1, you're wasting your time. This is something that don't cast your pearls before swine. This is one of the pearls that I believe you can't waste before people who don't believe anyway. I just wanted you to see that. But other than that, if you go just a couple chapters into Genesis chapter 3, I believe you have the first mention by Elohim of the possibility of a resurrection, even though it's very vague. Hindsight is 20/20, and we certainly have that. And we have the Ruach HaKodesh given to us, just like Yeshua gave it to Yochanan and the other Shlichim who were there at the resurrection. We can see this now. If you go to Bereshit chapter 3, verse 15, and what's going on here? Adam has fallen. He and Chava ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which they were told not to eat. And they suddenly changed. They lost the kavod, the Shekhinah of Elohim, the glory. Their bodies were therefore exposed. And Elohim comes along, and he tells both the serpent and the woman and the man what their punishment is for this infraction against his instructions. And he says to the serpent, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And of course, I personally believe that Yeshua bruised the head of the serpent, certainly when he rose from the dead, because he conquered death. And of course, Mavet. That's what the serpent brought to the earth when he convinced Adam to commit sin. So in my mind, this is the very first allusion to the resurrection of the Messiah. Okay. Next, if we proceed through the book, then we're going to get to Abraham. And honestly, there's probably multiple places where you can see the resurrection on a deeper level in the story of Abraham. But one that is on the surface and is already interpreted for us is what I'm going to cover. And I'm going to do it from the book of Hebrews chapter 11, verse 17. By emunah, by trust, by believing, absolute trust, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Yitzhak. And if you don't know the story, that is his son of the promise. That is the one that God said would inherit everything that he had promised to Abraham, and that all the world would be blessed, not through Ishmael, but through Yitzhak. So he offered him upon the altar his Yahid, his beloved one, his unified one, the one that he was deeply in love with, his son, even that very one who had been received in the promise, of whom it was said, in Yitzhak shall a seed be called forth for you. And he reasoned, this is 11:19 in Hebrews. He reasoned in himself, Abraham reasoned in himself, it is possible for Elohim even to raise the dead. So belief in the resurrection, then, just that, not only believing that Yeshua is risen from the dead, but just believing in the resurrection of the dead in general is critical to our faith. And it proves that you are also a son of Abraham, because if you believe that Abraham is the father of our faith, then you kind of have to walk like he walked. You kind of have to believe what he believed. And Abraham was messianic. He was looking forward. This same passage that I'm quoting, if you back up a few verses, it says of Abraham, he was looking ahead to a city whose builder and maker is Elohim. He was looking for the messianic age. Abraham was messianic. Okay? And so we see here, and you all know the story, it's Genesis chapter, I forget the chapter, it's in the 20s, 19, 20, 21, somewhere along in there, where Abraham, Yitzhak has grown up, and Elohim comes to Abraham and says, give me your firstborn son. And he takes him up to the mountain where the temple would eventually stand, and he volunteers, he raises the knife to his own son's neck, and the messenger stops him, and an offering is given to him in the place of his son. So the point here is that Abraham believed already in the resurrection, and it doesn't come out and say that over in Bereshit where this story unfolds, but you can see it, because when they're walking on their way, and it's interesting to me, there's overtones of the Passover in that whole event, and I'm not going to teach it here, but I just want to bring this up. They're 3 days away when Yitzhak says, where Ephel Haseh, where is the lamb? And that's when Abraham says, by trust, Yahweh Yireh, he will see to it that there is a lamb. Elohim himself, Yahweh himself will provide the lamb. He will see to it that there is a lamb. So he had trust. And he looked for the city, and of course Shaul is telling us in Ivrim that he believed in the resurrection. So, any questions about that? Okay, we'll move on then. Next place, and this is one that I've already mentioned to you or hinted about, and it was the one that tricked me. I didn't look closely enough at it in the Hebrew when I was doing the translation that I did. So if you own a copy of Hadavar, a physical copy of it, You might want to make a note of this. In Job, chapter 19, verses 25 and 26. Eov is writing and he says, "But as for me, I know that Goali lives." I'm going to put it in the text for you so you'll have it if you want to make a note of it. As for me, I know that Goali, that's my Redeemer. I know that my Redeemer, Goali, lives, and at the end he will arise from the dust. That's what was different in the translation that I used, that I referenced as a base text to offer up this verse to our readers. But I looked at it more closely, and that's what it says. And at the end, Acharon, he will arise. Kum, there's our word. TekumahMiBeinHaMetim. Yakum is the word. You take that word kum and conjugate it to fit in this sentence correctly, and it's the same word. He will arise from the dust. Who? My Redeemer. So that's a prophecy about Yeshua's resurrection from the dead. And then the next verse, and even after my skin is rotted, in my flesh shall I see Eloah. In my flesh shall I see Eloah. The Jewish people have changed that and says, my flesh will not see God. I will not be in my flesh. They completely butchered it. Okay, and that's what I was talking about, is people that don't believe in the resurrection go to great lengths to try to keep people from deciding on their own, kind of like Democrats. So you have Eov, who is very early in the faith. He's before Moshe. He's almost a contemporary of Shem. He predates Abraham. This guy is way back in the calendar of God, and he believes in the resurrection. He says, my Redeemer lives. And of course, Yeshua, we know our Redeemer to be Yeshua. And Eov, he's messianic. He says, my Redeemer lives, and I will see him. He will arise from the dust himself.
Did they know it's Job?
Yeah, I just said that. So there's other places, and we're going to kind of go back to Genesis here in a little bit, but I'm trying to do the ones that are a little more poignant, and then we're going to go backwards maybe a little bit at a later point. But the next place that I want to look at is Tehillah 2, Psalm chapter 2. And that is a prediction. It's another prophecy by David, much like Psalm 16 was. And this one, we not only have the Ruach telling us when we read this, if you're reading Psalm 2 in a Bible and you're a believer already, you've never been educated on the word, but you sit down and read Psalm 2 and you see this, you go, oh, wow, probably the Ruach just tickles you and says, look at that. And in verse 7 it says, and I will tell of the decree. Yahweh said unto me, you are my son, this day have I begotten you. All right, and you read that whole psalm and you might be thinking, well, how does that talk about the resurrection? Well, it may not on the surface level, but it certainly does, because this one has also been interpreted much like Kepha interpreted Psalm 16 over in Acts chapter 13. I say 13, verse 33. I'm going to start in 32. And behold, we also declare to you that very promise which was made to our fathers, and this is a Jewish man writing to the Jewish people, or speaking to the Jewish people, behold, Elohim has fulfilled it to us, their children, for he, Elohim, has raised up, there's our word again, TekumahMiBeinHaMetim, Kum, he has raised up Yeshua, just as it is written in the second Tehillah. So he specifically quotes this. They don't do that very often, but he quotes the chapter and book in the second Tehillah, Psalm 2. He quotes it, you are my son, this day I have fathered you. And in verse 34, and Elohim raised him from the dead. So he's basically saying that part of the interpretation of that verse is that Elohim raised Yeshua from the dead, no more to return to corruption. As he said, I will give you the faithful compassions of David. And again, he said in another place, you shall not suffer your chassid to see decay. So Kepha interpreted that verse this way. Shaul adds Psalm 2 to it and says that it's also fulfilled in Psalm 16, but he's basically saying that Psalm 2 is a prophecy about the resurrection. I'm going to take a little break. it's kind of hard to move forward without any feedback. So I'm liking the venue or the method of doing this, but the one thing I do miss is a little bit of feedback. Okay. No questions, we'll move forward. Well, good question, but that's actually what he says. Acharon. So it is alluding to the end times. It's not a could it be that way. He's basically saying in the last days, Acharon, Yamim Acharim. There's another Yom Acharon is over in Psalm 31. So I do believe it's specifically talking about the last days and the resurrection at the last days. At the end, he will rise from the dead. Yes, I believe that's what the interpretation of that is, Betsy. Okay, good question. So we looked at Tehillah 16 and 2. Let's go to 22. And a lot of people understand that this psalm is about Yeshua, especially the first 16 to 20 verses. It's a very, very familiar psalm. But the part that I'm going to talk about is the latter part of it, starting in verse 21. And this is after you see all the suffering. The first part of Psalm 22 talks about all the suffering that Messiah is going to do. My bones are out of joint. I'm pierced. I'm bleeding. I can't remember the exact language, but we could look at it. But starting in verse 21, whoever this is that is suffering this way cries out and says, "Deliver my soul." Remember what we talked about. He did not leave my soul in Sheol. Deliver my soul from the sword, my only one from the power of the dog. And the word that is translated as rotting skin up there in Job 19:26 is also in that verse. So I think there's a bit of a linguistic connection here to show you that both of these are talking about resurrection. Save me from the lion's mouth. And of course, in this context, the lion is Mashiach HaSheker, which is the false Messiah, and not certainly the Lion of Judah, but this false Messiah. It's Hasatan. Save me from the lion's mouth. Yes, from the horns of the wild oxen do you answer me. So Yeshua knows he's going. In this song, he cries out what he cried out on the tree, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Why have you forsaken me? So he knows what's about to happen to him. Okay, and he's crying out, don't leave me there. Let the humble eat and be satisfied. Let them praise Yahweh that seek after him. May your heart be quickened. Yehi leolam. May your heart live forever. And so he's talking to himself, and the psalmist does that a lot. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn unto Yahweh, and all the kindreds of the Goyim shall worship before you. For Hamlucha, the kingdom, belongs to Yahweh, and he is ruler over the Goyim. All the fat ones of the earth shall eat and worship. All they that go down to the dust shall kneel before him. Even he that cannot keep his soul alive. A seed shall serve him. It shall be told about an eye unto the next generation. They shall come and shall declare his righteousness unto a people that shall be born, that he has done it. And so I do believe that there is sort of some imagery, poetic imagery of the resurrection in these verses. The next passage that we're going to look at, however, really excites me. Some of you have heard me teach on it before, but given the day that we live in, it is really, really exciting. It's talking about the resurrection, and of course, we've been talking about Yeshua's resurrection, and that is the hub of our faith, but it's also a promise to us. And so we are supposed to also trust that we ourselves are going to rise from it, just like Job did. My Redeemer is going to arise at the last day, but so am I. I'm going to see God in my flesh. So hopefully you're getting the idea that resurrection is a theme of the Bible. It's not just a side note. It's not just, it's not just about Yeshua. It is the proof that he rose from the dead, or that he is the Messiah, rather, that he is the Son of God, the fact that he is risen from the dead and no other has, certainly not after 3 days like he did, and then appeared to people for 43 days. But this next passage is about other people rising from the dead. And that is Yeshayahu chapter 26. And in verse 2, it says, "Open the gates that the righteous nation that keeps faithfulness may enter in." And when I've taught this in regard to prophecy in the past, what we're talking about is Yom Teruah. And Yom Teruah is the day of the opening of the gates. And so you have an allusion to, a hint about Yom Teruah being going on in this chapter. And so down in verse 17, then you have language about Messiah, about the Messianic age. "Like a woman with child that draws near to the time of her delivery, is in pain and cries out in her pangs, so we have been at your presence, O Yahweh. We have been with child. We have been in pain. We have given birth to wind. We have not wrought any deliverance in the land, neither are the inhabitants of the world come to life." Look at 19. "Your dead shall live." And then it flips. "My dead bodies shall arise." This is almost like a conversation at that point. "Awake." And if you don't know that, that's kind of Jewish speak for rise from the dead. "Awake and sing, you that dwell in the dust, for your dew is as the dew of light, and the earth shall bring to life the shades." And the word shades there is Rephaim, and that is always talking about someone who has been in the land of the dead. Okay? The earth shall bring to life the shades. Okay, so somebody's going to rise from the dead. And then immediately after that, it says, "Go, my people, come into your chederim and shut your doors about you." And I've seen this quoted on Facebook a lot by people talking about the corona plague, and they don't know the depth of this verse that they're citing. "Go, my people, come into your chederim, your rooms." Yeshua said over in Yochanan chapter 13, "In my Father's house there are many rooms." Okay? "Go into your rooms and shut your doors about you. Hide yourself for a little moment until the indignation passes." That's the day of the wrath of Elohim. And hide yourself until it passes. "For behold, Yahweh comes forth out of his place to visit upon the inhabitants of the earth their iniquity. The earth also shall disclose her blood and shall no more cover her slain." And so what that's talking about is people that go around killing people. You can't hide it from God. And there's a lot of people in places of power today that think that God doesn't see what they're doing, but he does. But that passage right there is talking about the resurrection of more than one person. Your dead shall live. My dead bodies, plural, shall arise. Awake and sing, you that dwell in the dust. This is Messiah talking to all of those who trust in him, who will rise from the dead one day. Yep. Stephen says our flesh will be changed one day, and that can no longer decay, but it will still be the same flesh we have today. That is correct. We're going to rise in the same body we have. Abba knows what he's doing. He's the one who built it. He can rebuild it better, stronger, and faster. So yes, we're going to rise from the dead, and we're going to get to that. The passage that you alluded to there, Stephen. But first, let's go to Yeshayahu chapter 53. Most everybody, especially on this study, you know that chapter, Isaiah 53. You know how very much about Yeshua it is. We now read it every day, every Shabbat during the Torah service. And so in verse 8 is where I'm going to start in Yeshayahu 53, Isaiah 53. "For he was cut out of the land of the living, for the transgression of my people to whom the stroke was due. And they made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich his tomb. Although he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased Yahweh to break him in weakness. So you would make his soul as a guilt offering." And if you look at a guilt offering, you can see the imagery that it's invoking here in regard to Yeshua's soul. Okay? that he might see his seed. Who? This person that is suffering might see his seed prolong his days. So there's an allusion to the resurrection there. He's suffering, but he's going to prolong his days, and that the desire of Yahweh might prosper by his hand. Of the travail of his soul he shall see to the full. This is what Yeshua was preparing for when he was hanging on the tree, the travail of his soul, which happened in Sheol. Even my servant, by his knowledge, my servant, a tzaddik, shall justify many, and their iniquities will he bear. All right, our Jewish people have also tweaked the English in this one, and I did catch that on the first pass. I knew that they had done that. Therefore will I divide him a portion among the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the mighty. This is after the fact. So this is showing that whoever this is that suffered and dies for the sake of the sins of others, which is what previous verses said, he's continuing on. He's going to go on because he poured out his soul unto Mavet, and there it is. He poured out his soul into Mavet. He gave himself up to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yeshua was buried with thieves. Yet he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors.
He was killed with thieves, right?
Yep.
Was he buried with them?
No, well, similarly. I mean, they were nearby, I'm sure. He was in a tomb by itself, though. Mm-hmm. So Joe asked, what about cremation? I done a write-up on that. I'll have to see if I can find it. I think it's just an email, so I think we can still have access to it. I'm not 100% sure, but I will not be cremated, and anybody that I'm associated with or sort of minister to will not be cremated unless there's some ridiculous reason why. Because cremation is reserved for the pagans. They burn their bodies. So I don't believe that a believer should do that. You go all the way back to Abraham, and he made sure that he had a grave that his body could be put in. So did Isaac, so did Jacob. They were and their wives. They wanted their wives buried in the same grave with them, or at least nearby, or at least buried in a tomb. So, and there's verses about that, but it's a long study to study out and to prove. But I do believe that the scriptures compel us to bury our dead, to bury our whole body. So no, I don't believe that cremation is right for a believer. Some people have done it. Believers have done it, and I believe in their ignorance. Certainly, God is all powerful, and He knows where every speck of dust of their body is. And if they are slated to be risen from the dead, He can raise them from the dead. I'm going to leave that up to Him. That's up to Him. But and it's not that I don't trust that He can do that, and that that I should go the cheap route and have my own body cremated to save my family money or something. That's not what it is. I believe that we're given the example, and we're given specific instructions about it. And every example that I can find, including Yeshua himself, his body was put in a tomb. Their bodies are put in tombs. Their bones are gathered. And so I intend, if I go that way, which I hope not to, I intend for my frame to be available for Elohim to resurrect from the dead. In one of the scriptures that we might look at is Yechezkel, Ezekiel chapter 37. Say to these bones, live. He speaks to the bones. Obviously, some bones will just absolutely disappear over a certain amount of time, I guess. But nonetheless, the mode of internment for believers in Messiah is burial and not cremation. So I'll try to find that email, that write-up that I did, if I can still get it. And it has all the scriptural references, and it does a better job than a little 2-minute answer can give you on Facebook. But that's sort of the short answer. Let's see. Well, looky there. Ezekiel is the very next one that I had to reference anyway. Yechezkel chapter 37, verse 5. Thus says Adonai Yahweh, unto these bones, He says, behold, I will cause ruach, breath, to enter into you, and you shall live, and I will lay sinews, that's muscles, upon you, and will bring up flesh upon you, and cover you with skin, and put ruach, breath in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I am Yahweh. So there, right there in Ezekiel 37 is a very clear picture of the resurrection. And if you check the timing of it, it's the last days, and it's a lot of people. And that's what Isaiah is talking about in chapter 26. Your dead shall live. The dead in the earth shall arise from the dust. So it's the same thing. It's a concept of the resurrection of the people of God. And not just Messiah himself, but all that trust in him. And so those are some very plain scriptures about it. And then there are some that are allusions to. They're illusory. They're hints. They're sort of remez, dresh. Not peshat, but remez and dresh level, even sod level hints in the scriptures about resurrection and imagery of the resurrection are in the scriptures. And again, a lot of people can't see these because they just can't see. They don't want to see. They don't want to believe in Yeshua. They don't want to believe in the resurrection because that proves he's the Son of God. And so they're just going to deny it anyway. But hopefully the Ruach will show you that these, I believe, are alluding to, hinting about it in some way. And so the first place, sort of staying in line as to where we've been and up to now, is Hosea chapter 6. Come and let us return unto Yahweh. And that word there is probably the root word for teshuvah. For he has torn and he will heal us. He has smitten and he will bind us up. After 2 days will he revive us. On the third day he will raise us up, that we may live in his presence. And so I believe this is talking about not the resurrection of Yeshua, but the resurrection of the Jewish people. Okay? And I want you to think about this. Come and let us return unto Yahweh, for he has torn and he will heal us. He has smitten and he will bind us up. After 2 days he will revive us. On the third day he will raise us up. If you consider that Hosea is a contemporary of Isaiah and a prophet to the northern kingdom, that puts him 900 years before Yeshua. And so that's at the very beginning of the fourth day of the world week. And you should know what I'm talking about here. There's 7,000 years reserved for man. Yeshua showed up at the end of the fourth day. This is at the beginning of the fourth day. And the Jewish people, since the time of Hosea, have been torn up. They've been punished. They've been, and it's after 3 more days, 3,000 years from Hosea, that they're going to turn and they're going to believe in Messiah. And he says, after 2 days he will revive us, and on the third day he will raise us up, that we may live in his presence. So we've been seeing them come to Messiah, but one day all of Israel will be saved, and they will all rise from the dead, those who put their trust in him, those who do teshuvah. So I think that that's a hint about the resurrection at the very end. So, and it's about our Jewish people. Okay, so the next one, we're going to go backwards in the book chronologically and go back to Bereshit, but only back to Joseph, Yosef. And I can't spend a lot of time on this. The details of his life are more than any of the other patriarchs. You have Abraham, you got some details about him, you have a few details about Yitzchak. I really love his story, and I love the imagery of Isaac. But Yosef has a lot of chapters about him. He's one of the best examples of a sort of an image of Messiah in the Old Testament. And so hopefully everybody that's looking at this, you know the story of Yosef. You at least remember pieces and parts of it, even as just from felt boards when you were a child. But he was sold out by his brothers, and they put him in a pit. He gets up out of the pit. His dad thinks he's dead. His brothers tell their dad that he's dead, but in actuality, he's alive. And so right there, in one sense, you have a picture of a resurrection. And then again, some years later, he's in Potiphar's house. He's become the ruler of his house. He's a good-looking guy, and he gets falsely accused of wanting to have an affair with her, when the truth is she wanted it with him, but she falsely accuses him, as false believers are prone to do. She falsely accuses him, and what happens to him? He gets thrown into prison. And he's there for quite some time, and then he comes up out of the prison, and he ends up being the ruler of all. He gets set up high above only. He's basically the right hand of Pharaoh, just like Yeshua is the right hand of Elohim. So in the life of Yosef, it doesn't say it on the surface level. Here's Yosef, and he's a little picture of Messiah. It doesn't say that, but you can certainly see it when you understand the nature of Scripture. So I just wanted to throw that one in here, even though it would take a long time to show you all the details. I have taught on that before. And maybe one day I'll do a zero in on Yosef himself, because it's just such a fascinating story. Any questions? Okay. The next one, I'm going to read some of Yeshua's words first before we consider it. It's kind of similar to Yosef. It's a big picture, and I can't spend all night reading the story, but we can certainly look at Yeshua's words and see his interpretation of it. And theologians take this verse and they say, is that proof that Yeshua rose from the dead? Well, we can't say that. So Yeshua in Matthew chapter 12, he says, for as Yonah was in the great fish's belly, and Yonah is Jonah, as Yonah was in the great fish's belly 3 days and 3 nights, so Ben Ha'adam will be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. Even the men of Nineveh will rise up in judgment with this generation and find it guilty. What does Shoal say over in Corinthians chapter 6, I believe it is? Do you not know that you would judge the Melachim, the messengers? Okay, so Nineveh is going to rise up and judge the first generation the first century generation of Jews. They're going to rise from the dead to do that. For they repented. Who? Nineveh. They repented through the declaration of Yonah. And behold, one greater than Yonah is here. So Yeshua is saying that Yonah was thrown into, he uses the word like for as Yonah was in the great fish's belly 3 days and 3 nights. So that's a compare and contrast. That's sort of a simile or metaphor. I always get them wrong. It's been a long time since I've studied grammar, but that's like or as. That's a comparison. Yeshua is saying that you saw Yonah was in the belly of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights, and it very specifically says that over in Yonah, that he was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, and the fish then spewed him out. That's a picture, Yeshua is saying, of the resurrection. So also Ben Ha'adam will be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. And we believe, if you know anything about us, we believe that it's critical that we believe that Yeshua actually stayed in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. For one thing, it fixes the counting of the Omer like we have it. So, but Yeshua is telling us that story is an allusion to, it's imagery about me, about the resurrection, my rising from the dead after 3 days and 3 nights. So Yeshua here is actually prophesying his resurrection openly. He's coming out and saying it, and he's doing it to Jewish scholars. If you don't know, Matthew chapter 12, that's who he's talking to, is scribes and Pharisees. He's talking to people that are educated, and they're challenging him in the word, and he's outright telling them, I'm going to rise from the dead. Okay? The Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. There's no question what he's talking about. But even if you doubt that, did Yeshua actually say that he was going to rise from the dead? Yes, absolutely, in 2 other places. But he did so openly, and because he's talking to Jewish people and he is a Jew himself, they have the mandate of the Torah in mind, in all likelihood, how to test a prophet. If what he says does not come to pass, do not fear him. So if Yeshua is going around saying, I'm going to rise from the dead in 3 days, and then he doesn't get up out of the grave, you don't have to worry about whether or not what he taught was true. Okay? In Luke chapter 18, then Yeshua took the 12 and said to them, behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and all things written by the Nevi'im concerning Ben Ha'adam, that's the Son of Man, which is how Yeshua referred to himself more than any other way, just about, will be fulfilled, for he will be delivered. This is Yeshua talking about himself in the second person. For he will be delivered. Or is that third person? For he will be delivered to the Goyim, and they will mock him and spit in his face. And they will scourge him and curse him and kill him. Yes, third person. And on the third day he will rise again. You can't get any more clear about that. Yeshua is talking about himself. Everybody knows it. He's been going around calling himself Ben Ha'adam. He's talking about himself. He says they're going to scourge him. They're going to, he gets almost detailed about how he's going to die. They're going to spit in his face, and they're going to scourge him and curse him and kill him. And on the third day, he will rise again. And look at verse 34. This goes back to what I said, that God has to reveal this to a person. But they understood not one of these things. And this saying was hidden from them, and they did not know these things which were spoken to them. And that's talking about the people he was talking to, the Pharisees. And they didn't get it. He said it openly. And they didn't realize that he was he was giving them the most drastic prophecy that anybody could ever give. And by the way, I'm going to go ahead and mention this. I've seen a lot of posts about Kim Clement and Christians, believers, posting Kim Clement and all his so-called prophecies about Trump. And I haven't read one of them because I know the vagary that he uses. I had to investigate this guy about 12 years ago when he lived up here. If I'm not mistaken, he lived in Huntsville, and his church was up in Huntsville. But so whenever that first hurricane of the series of hurricanes that hit the Houston area was about to strike, I can't remember which one it was. I think it was Rita, but I'm not sure. It was Katrina. It was Katrina. Right before Katrina hit, that Kim Clement made a prophecy and said that Houston was going to be destroyed. I think it was Katrina. It might have been Ike. But he made a prophecy that Houston was going to be destroyed in the name of the Lord. Houston is going to be, I see fire burning Houston down. I see all this destruction coming on Houston. And we had people coming to our synagogue basically telling us, you got to move to Shreveport. You got to get out of here. We had one person actually move to Shreveport believing this whack crackpot prophet basically saying that Houston was going to be destroyed. And I stood up in front of God and everybody and said, that's a lie. It's not going to happen. That's not God speaking. Stop listening to this guy. And here we are 12 years later. The guy died in 2017, and he prophesied himself that he was going to live until he was in his 90s. And he was barely in his 50s, I think, still, or early 60s when he died 2 years ago. So I just wanted to bring that up. Stop listening to these whack job prophets, because and that's the test that they should have used on Yeshua. Oh man, this guy is saying that he's going to rise from the dead. We better mark this down. We better write this down, because if he doesn't rise from the dead, because there are people. There's a guy, Menachem Schneerson, was a Jewish man up in New York, and who said he was the Messiah, and they believed he was going to rise from the dead. After 3 days, they believed the messianic prophecies, and they waited for him to rise. This is back in like 1984 or 86, somewhere along in there. They believed that he was going to rise from the dead. He did not rise from the dead. They're still waiting. There's a whole religion of Jewish people waiting for that guy to rise from the dead. He hasn't done it, and they're coming up with every excuse as to why he's still the Messiah. Okay, and that's the point that I'm making is if Yeshua had been a false prophet, people could have still gone on and said that he was the Messiah if, in fact, he wasn't, because that's what happened with Schneerson. I hope this is coming out like I'm wanting you to understand it. But the point that I'm making is Yeshua made a very specific prophecy. They're going to scourge me. They're going to beat me, spit in my face, curse me, kill me, and I'm going to rise from the dead on the third day. You cannot get more emphatic than that.
The true prophet's never wrong.
That's right. You probably hear my wife back there. She's over there saying a true prophet is never wrong. That's what the Torah says. If the words do not come to pass, do not hear him. Do not pay him any mind. Do not fear it. Do not listen to it. And so Kim Clement has lucked out and seemed right on a few things, but there's far too many times where he's just been blowing wind, and people need to stop listening to that junk. The next one that I want to look at is Yochanan chapter 13. And this kind of goes back and links with Yeshayahu, Isaiah chapter 26. I'll give you a little bit of time to get there. Got on my high horse a little bit.
If he's dead, how is he still prophesying?
Well, he's not, but they believe that he would rise from the dead. Talking about Schneerson?
No, Kim.
Kim Clement?
Yeah.
They still have his prophecies on record. They have videos of him saying things about Trump. Okay. Yochanan chapter 13, verse 33. My sons, let me set the context here. This is in the middle of the Pesach Seder. If I'm not mistaken, Yeshua has already washed the feet of his Talmidim. And he says, my sons, I am with you yet a little while, and you will seek me. And just as I said to the Odim, where I go you cannot come, same I now tell you also. Verse in chapter 14, he says, let not your heart be troubled, trust in Elohim, and trust in me also. In the house of Avi are many rooms. That's the verse, that's why I said this is linking us back to Yeshayahu 26. There are many chederim, there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you with me, so that where I am, you may be also. You know where I am going, and you know the way. And of course, then he has a teaching and a discussion about the way. But the main thing that I wanted you to see is this is the night before Yeshua was about to be executed. He knew he was going to suffer and die, but he also knew that he would rise from the dead. And so he's telling them a twofold thing. Because he's basically telling them, you're going to rise from the dead too. Because Kepha pipes up and says, well, I'll follow you anywhere, and you know that whole story. But Yeshua basically alludes to the fact that, yeah, you're gonna suffer just like I did, but basically, yeah, you're gonna rise from the dead. That's what he's talking about, is you're gonna go through the resurrection just like I did. Where I go, you cannot come now, but I will come again and take you to me. But this is also about what I believe is going to happen in our near future, possibly very, very soon. And that is the resurrection of the dead, and the catching away of the believers, and the transformation of those who are alive at that moment. And so I'm going to go and read some of those scriptures, and I've taught in some sort of ad hoc sessions with our little group about those things, but it never hurts to sort of repeat those things a little bit. But what I want to show you here is that the resurrection, all of this stuff that we've talked about, what I've tried to do is show you that the resurrection itself is replete in the scriptures, that it's one of the themes of the scriptures. And it's, in my view, it's the most important theme of scripture, is the fact that resurrection is going to happen. That's the destination of every believer, is resurrection from the dead. It's a promise. It's our hope. It's something that we look forward to, and we look forward to it by emunah, by trust, just like Abraham did. He looked at it, the execution of his son, that he himself was asked to do, and he said, well, God will raise him from the dead. So, yeah, Teresa says, let's meet him in the air. That's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to go first to 1 Corinthians 15. Once again, we read there in the beginning of that chapter a while ago, but I want us to go there now and read more toward the end of that chapter. If I can get it open. Any questions while I'm digging for scriptures? Okay, no questions. So, this is a very familiar passage. And based on some of the names that I saw tonight, most of you probably believe this, but for future viewers, I want to do this anyway. Verse 51 says, behold, I tell you a sod. I want to read that in Hebrew. Give me just a second. Hine omer ani lachem sod. Behold, I show to you, I speak to you a sod. We shall not all be changed. I'm sorry, we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last shofar. For the shofar shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. So I'm going to put that word in our text here. Okay, I had several questions while I was digging for scripture. I'll try to get back to each of those. Behold, I tell you a sod, we shall not all die, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last shofar, for the shofar shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible. There it is. Remember, Yeshua's body did not see corruption or decay. It's the same thing there. Raised, TekumahMiBeinHaMetim, raised from the dead, raised incorruptible. And so the dead in Messiah will rise, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption. This physical body that can decay must put on a body that cannot. And this mortal must put on immortality. That's basically redundancy, a different way to say the same thing. So not only will it not be corruptible, but it won't even be able to die. Mavet will be swallowed up in victory. O Mavet, that's death. Where is your sting? O Sheol, where is your victory? That's the kingdom of Hasatan. Okay, so everybody knows this, but what the thing that I'm pointing out is that our word sod there is Sheol being very, very Jewish. A sod is a biblical mystery, and so what he's telling you is he dug that out of the scriptures. So the notion of people rising at the blast of a shofar is in the scriptures.
The last shofar, too.
And Melanie's pointing out it's the last shofar, yes, but the idea of rising from the dead being associated with the shofar goes all the way back to Yosef, because he told them, "Don't leave my bones," and that's part of the argument for against cremation and for burial. Is Yosef was so concerned about his bones, he said, "Don't leave them here in Mitzrayim. Bring them back and put them in a grave." And what a lot of people don't know is the grave of Yosef was around for a long time. It may still be, but the last I heard, it had a shofar inscribed on the stone, and a lot of graves over there did. The ancient graves had a shofar inscribed on the stone of the grave, and it's the hope of the resurrection. But so if you read in the Tehillim with us every day, then you should have read today part of the sod that Shul is talking about. I'm going to go to the Siddur because I have both the Hebrew and English. So give me a second to open Siddur. So today was the 5th day of the week before the sun went down. And so I do my noontime prayers, and part of what I do at noontime is read whatever the daily Tehillah is for the day. And today was 81. And it says, Lamnatzech al Hagitit le'asaf. For the leader upon the Gittit, for Asaph. And Asaph means to gather together. And so I have taught this before. This Asaph Psalms, I believe, allude to the gathering of God's people in the Natsal, in the resurrection, in the rapture. And the next verse, Harninu le'Elohim zenu. And that basically says, let us rejoice in Elohim, our strength. Hariu le'Elohei Yaakov. Shout unto the God of Yaakov. Se'uzimra utinu tov kino na'imim navel. And then in verse 4, there it is, day 4, verse 4 maybe. Tikuva chodesh shofar ba'keseh le'yom chagenu. Blast the shofar at the chodesh, at the renewed moon. At the new moon of our Chag, our feast, our celebration. Okay? And so you have right there, and look at the next thing he says, Ki chok l'Yisrael hu mishpat le'Elohei Yaakov. It is a chok for Yisrael. It is a judgment, a ruling of the God of Yaakov. What is? The blast of the shofar. It's a chok. What is a chok? A chok is a biblical command that has no explanation, and I've taught this. If you look at Vayikra 23, and you see all of the feasts in there, all of them are given the reason for them except for Yom Teruah. There's no explanation for it. It's the only time it's mentioned in Scripture in plain language. It is only thereafter alluded to or spoken about at the Sod level, at the mystery level. And so Shaul, as a deep student of the Scriptures, I believe this was one of the places that he is referencing. And there's multiple places, especially in the Tehillim, about the shofar blast and the rising of the dead. And so he interpreted out of these things and out of the notion of a world week that there's going to be a mass resurrection of dead people. And then at the same time that some people are just going to change. And so that is a natsal. That's a catching away of the believers. And so let me look at some of the questions. I think we're ripe for rapture. How does 2,000 years since Yeshua died connect with the rapture? Well, I've explained that many, many times. And what it is it has to do with what I've been mentioning, the world week. There are 2 days reserved for Adam. There are 2 days reserved for Israel. There are 2 days reserved for the Messiah. And after that, the day of Yahweh, the last millennium. And so it has been 2 days since on the world week, which is a day is 1,000 years in the eyes of Elohim. And Kepha says this. He says, don't you know, or you yourselves know well. Who is he writing to? Kepha was writing to the Jewish people. You yourselves know very well that a day to Elohim is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. He's quoting a psalm that also is going around a lot today, and that's Psalm 91. A day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are as a day. And in Psalm 91, it says a day is as a watch in the night for Elohim. So there's 6,000 years reserved for mankind, and we are in the last days. We're in the last 3 days. That's day 5, 6, and then Shabbat, which is the millennium when Yeshua will come back. Where did Paul get the catching away from? Tracy, did I answer your question yet? I know that's just one verse, but do you see it? This is kind of thin, but there are other places in the Psalms that talk about it. Isaiah 26 is one of them. Go into your cheder. So it's not something that you just get out of one verse. It's a thing that you have to put together from a lot of verses in the Tanakh. I don't have time to do that right now, but this is certainly one of those places. Were more people resurrected at the time of Yeshua's resurrection, and are they not already present? There were people resurrected at the moment of his death. What happened to them, we do not know. My contention is that they must have gone to heaven, because it says many of the Kedoshim, many of the holy ones rose from the dead and walked about the city and were seen by many. That's in Matthew, I want to say about chapter 28. Are they not already present? What do you mean by already present? Do you mean present in heaven? That's kind of what I think, but I can't say that. Maybe they died again. I don't know. Lazarus died again. The one that Yeshua raised from the dead after 4 days. Yeshua raised him from the dead, and he hung around and was a human being, and likely, my conclusion is he must have died again. Is that what happened to those people that rose from the dead the moment Yeshua died on the tree? I don't know. I can't say. We don't know. But yes, there were some who rose from the dead. Okay, now to Thessalonians chapter 4. I'll get there eventually. Okay, this too is a very famous passage, and it's one of the anchor scriptures for the concept of a natsal, which is what most people call rapture. And there's the root word of it in Hebrew if you're curious about it. And that does mean to be caught up. I want you to know, my brethren, that you should not grieve over those who are dead, as those who have no hope. For if we believe that Yeshua died and rose again, and hopefully we've established that that's what we believe, even so, those who have died in Yeshua, in other words, someone who believed in Yeshua, they trusted in Yeshua, they obeyed Yeshua, and they are dead, Elohim will bring with him. For this we say to you by the very word of Adonai. In other words, Shaul is saying, I didn't make this up. This is in the scriptures, that we who are the remnant until the coming of Adonai shall not precede those who are dead. For Adonai himself shall descend from heaven with a shout. There's the teruah, Yom Teruah, and with the voice of the chief malach, and with the shofar of Elohim. And those who died in Mashiach will rise first. Then we who are the remnant, which are alive, shall be caught up together. And there's that word in that we're calling natsal, even though in the Hebrew it's not that, it's chefes or something like that. I'd have to look at it. Caught up together with them in the clouds to meet Adonai in the air, and so shall we ever be with us. How so? Resurrected from the dead, so shall we be with Adonai. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. And like I talked about on Shabbat, that's one of the things that we have to look. That is the thing that we have to look forward to. All of this junk that's going on in the world that tells us that people are going bananas. They're going out of their minds. They're all they do is argue. All they want to do is shout down the next guy and put down the next guy and hurt the next guy and starve. People trying to starve us to death by killing our food supply chain. And everybody. A lot of people. 10% of the people are already out of a job. It's only been 8 weeks. We're probably close to entering a Great Depression, and it could be scary. There's a lot of people. Suicide is up. Spousal abuse and all kinds of negative things are up. And all of that is symptomatic of all the other stuff that's up. The perversion that you see on television and in music and movies. And, as believers, we look at all this stuff and we're like, oh my gosh, that's why I believe we cry out, come, even so, come quickly, Messiah. Yes, come. But the thing that I want to point out to you is we have a hope. And that hope ultimately is our rising from the dead. And in a particular moment, those of us who are the remnant. And I talked about this on Shabbat. We were talking about unleavened bread, and Deborah, who I think is still on with us, had asked about. No, it might have been Hannah. Had asked about it beforehand because she was making bread and she was following Jewish instructions and pulled a lump of the dough out and said, "What is that symbolizing?" The word for remnant here is seor, which is the word for yeast, for leaven. Because you grab a little remnant, that last remaining part of the dough, you pull it out and you set it aside, and that's what you use to leaven your next lump of dough with. And that's what the remnant is a pulling out of the dough. And so there's a whole loaf of people that believe in Yeshua, but only a small handful of them actually have any worth. And they get extracted from the rest of them, and they're alive and caught up to be with him in the air. And so that's not every believer. So, but for those of us who trust in Yeshua, that's our hope. That's what we should be preparing for, is rising from the dead, looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it. We've got a few more minutes. I got one more scripture to look at. Two more. So we're going to go to the Hikalut chapter 20. And this is just one place in the Hikalut, in the Revelation, that talks about resurrection of us. I don't know that I wrote down the verse number. I don't think I did, so I'll have to scan it and find it right quick. Okay, it's going to be in the first part, and then we'll look also at the last chapter, the last part of the chapter. Verse 4, and I saw thrones and those who sat upon them, and judgment was given to them, and the souls of those who were beheaded for the witness of Yeshua and for Devar Elohim, who had not worshipped the wild beast, neither his image, nor had received his mark upon their foreheads or on their hand, lived and reigned with their Mashiach these 1,000 years. This is the first resurrection. And so people who are going to live with Messiah are going to who are going to rule with Messiah are participating in the first resurrection. It says, happy and kadosh is he who has part in the first resurrection. Over such, the second death has no power. And a lot of people don't know what the second death is, even though it explains it in the very next paragraph. They shall be the Kohanim, who? Those who are resurrected and participate in the first resurrection. They shall be the Kohanim of Elohim and of his Mashiach, and they shall reign with him 1,000 years. And when the 1,000 years has come to an end, Hasatan will be loosed. But that gets a little bit deeper than I wanted to go, so I'm going to go down to verse 11. And I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it, from whose presence the earth and the heavens fled away, and there was no place found for them. Then I saw the dead, small and great, stand before the throne, and the books were open, and another book was open, which is the Sefer HaChaim, the book of life, the book of the living. And the dead were judged by those things which were written in the books according to their works. That's the other books. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and Mavet and Sheol gave up the dead which were in them, and they were judged every man according to his works. This is the people that did not participate in the first resurrection. They get raised from the dead themselves, and then they are judged. Mavet and Sheol were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, which is the lake of fire, and whoever was not found written in the Sefer HaChaim was cast into the lake of fire. So the people who are judged according to their works, their evil deeds, the record of our sins that Yeshua erased, that they didn't trust in, they end up rising from the dead and being cast into the lake of fire in a resurrected body. That's what most people don't understand. And I think as a believer in Yeshua, you must understand that. Any questions about that? Because I got one more thing I want to talk about. I knew this was going to get tight in regard to time. Does it show in the Hikalut the catching away? Yes, it does. In two places. Chapter 4, Yochanan participates in the catching away himself. It says, I saw a gate. Remember I told you Isaiah 26:2. The gates were open and the righteous nation entered in. Well, in Hikalut chapter 4, the shofar, Yochanan says, I looked and behold, a gate was open in heavens, and I heard the voice of a shofar calling out to me, come up here. That's the catching away. He participated in the catching away 2,000 years ago. He's outside of time. He's going up with us. It's a bizarre thing to think about. You kind of have to have a sci-fi mind in order to understand that. And then again, in chapter 12, when you see the imagery of Yom Teruah, which is that constellation in the sky of Virgo with Jupiter coming out between her legs like an infant being born. That's when Jupiter goes into retrograde inside of Virgo. That's basically what that is. Jupiter moves because it's a planet. Even though they thought it was a star, it moves. And that entity gives birth. That entity is Israel. Gives birth to someone, and the child is caught up. That's a picture of us being caught up, the children of Israel. We are the children of the nation of Israel. Anyone who trusts in Abraham is the children of the nation of Israel, caught up and protected from the thing that happened to Israel on the earth, because the woman, Israel, is persecuted on the earth after that. So yes, there's two pictures of the Hikalut, at least, in the Hikalut of the Natsal. Last thing I want to talk about is, we've kind of already touched on it, but there is actually a verse. And so I want you to think about this. When you hear someone debating the resurrection, and in religious circles, someone outside of the congregation of Messiah, someone who doesn't have an association with faith, I don't care what they think about the resurrection. They're lost anyway. But someone who's walking around saying that they believe in Yeshua and wants to say something else about, and some of the Trinitarian people go there. Not all, most don't, because most Protestants who think they believe in the Trinity don't actually believe in the Trinity. They actually believe truth. They just word it the wrong way because they're scared to death to let go of Catholic terms, because they're still subject to the Pope. They worship on his day of the week. They keep his feast. They don't keep God's feast. So I have some grace for them. I wish they would wake up. But some people who believe in the Trinity subject Yeshua to or reduce their version of Jesus to a non-resurrected entity. And that's been going on for 2,000 years. Shaul says it in I want to say this is 2 Timothy. Their word is talking about two guys. It's talking about a group of people. Their word will be like a canker eating in many. This is death. It's a canker is a worm that eats flesh. Okay, their word will be like a canker eating in many. So someone who tells you that someone that wants to debate the resurrection of Yeshua is bringing death into the camp. Such are Hymenaeus and Philetus, who have strayed from the truth, saying that the resurrection of the dead is already past, thus destroying ha'emunah of some. In other words, they cause some people not to believe at all, or not to believe in the future resurrection because of their words. And there are people like that today. As a matter of fact, part of the Catholic Church, I don't know that it's all, actually teaches that the resurrection happened 2,000 years ago, and the papal kingdom is the kingdom of Messiah on earth, and this is what you get. There's nothing more to see. And so that is it may be the chief lie from Hasatan in our day, is to dismiss the resurrection. And I guess my point of all of this is we as believers in Messiah have to talk about the resurrection more. We don't declare it enough. That's what was declared to every person that Shaul and Kepha and all the Shlichim went to. They stuck to the simple declaration of the resurrection of Messiah from the dead. We don't do that enough. I try to do it a lot. I try to bring it up a lot. I try to make it emphatic and make people understand that he rose from the dead. It's not an idea. It's not just imagery. It's, this is an actual physical thing that happened here. Yeshua is risen from the dead, and it's important that we declare that. I got a minute left. Any questions or thoughts? I'll let you slow typers type.
Right.
I wish it would give me a little, the little ellipsis saying that someone is typing, but it doesn't do that on this app, so I can't tell. Okay. Did you say Yeshua's soul suffered in Sheol, but his flesh stayed in the tomb? Yes, I did. If the resurrection already happened and won't happen again, then what's the point? Kind of like those who think only 144,000 are saved. Yeah. Looks like that's my last question. Thank you. Thank y'all. I'm glad you joined us, and I hope you got something out of it. And I hope the rest of your week is good, which is just today. And you have a good Shabbat. And for Mikdash Me'at, I'll see you on Shabbat. Shalom.
What was that second question about the 100?
Litraot. What's that?